The alien mercenaries had celebrated their recent victory on the resource-rich jungle planet. Clusters of warriors lounged by fire pits, recounting their brutal successes and boasting of the human worlds they'd crushed with ease. Their laughter echoed into the thick jungle night, their confidence unshaken by whispers of an approaching human threat. Most didn't care. Humans, they believed, were weak and easily broken. But not all were so dismissive. Somewhere, unseen, a pair of eyes watched with calculated calm. The Green Beret, Earth's answer to impossible threats, observed the gathering with an unblinking focus, blending into the foliage, his breath silent, movements invisible. He had been dropped here on a mission that demanded silence and precision. Orders were to weaken the enemy, to strike fear, to show them what human resilience really meant. And most importantly, to teach these alien mercenaries a lesson they'd never forget. They called him primitive, a soldier reliant on crude technology, a lone human against their legion. But this soldier was no ordinary man. He had been trained to adapt, to fight against the odds, and to turn any terrain into a weapon. He saw the alien encampment as a puzzle to be solved. Every move they made, every formation, every moment of carelessness was noted. Tonight, he would begin his work. Silently, he crept along the edge of their camp, using the dense vegetation as cover. Alien guards stood at the perimeter, weapons glinting, confidence leaking from their relaxed postures. They believed they were safe. They had no idea they were being watched, sized up, and prepared for. He noticed a guard shift his weight, yawning as he glanced away from his assigned path. With a deft flick of his hand, the Green Beret tossed a small, silent dart. It sailed through the air and found its mark at the base of the guard's neck. No noise, no mess, just a slight stutter as the alien fell, softly and soundlessly. The others didn't notice. His work had begun. Moving swiftly, he retrieved the dart and disappeared back into the jungle. Minutes later, another guard fell, then another. The Green Beret was unrelenting, a shadow that seemed to materialize and vanish in the blink of an eye. By dawn, 5 guards were missing, their bodies left in positions that mocked the enemy's lack of vigilance. The next morning, the alien camp stirred with confusion. Rumors spread like wildfire. Was it sabotage? Desertion? They argued among themselves, theorizing and accusing one another. Yet no one could offer a clear explanation for the vanished guards. Their commanders dismissed it as a trivial disturbance, eager to maintain control over their soldiers. A few of the younger recruits, however, began to glance nervously at the trees, as if the shadows themselves might be hiding something sinister. The Green Beret watched their unease grow. He knew how to sow fear, how to let the enemy's imagination do half the work. With his experience, he understood the value of patience. And so, he continued his silent observation, tracking their routines, studying their weak points, noting where they were overconfident, and where they were most vulnerable. He had all the time he needed. By nightfall, the camp was on edge. Every twig snap made the younger guards jump. They held their weapons tighter, eyes darting to and fro, searching the darkness. Some muttered nervously, speaking in hushed tones about the supposed human they'd heard rumors about. The Green Beret, the lone warrior who could turn an entire battlefield in his favor. Most didn't believe it. The commanders scoffed and scolded the frightened recruits, dismissing their worries as childish fantasies. Just past midnight, the Green Beret struck again. This time, he left no bodies. Instead, he sabotaged their equipment, tampering with their communication devices and disabling several of their automated defenses. Alarms blared, triggering chaos as guards scrambled to locate the supposed attacker. Some of their systems began to malfunction, their screens flickering and giving distorted readings. Panic settled deeper among them as they failed to identify the source. The alien commanders were furious. They barked orders, organizing search teams and sending their best warriors into the jungle to locate the elusive enemy. But the Green Beret was a master of camouflage, melting into the environment as if he were born from it. He led them on a fruitless chase, watching as they expended their energy and resources, stumbling through the dense underbrush, their frustration growing with each passing hour. He knew exactly what he was doing, psychological warfare at its finest. By the time the search teams returned to camp, their confidence had cracked, and whispers began anew. The commanders tried to quell the rising fear, but it was too late. Doubt had taken root, and no amount of force could silence it. Hours later, the Green Beret continued his silent assault, this time targeting supplies. He crept into their storage areas, carefully depleting rations, removing fuel cells, leaving barely noticeable signs of tampering. By the time the alien forces noticed the theft, it was morning, and the cracks in their morale were painfully visible. Soldiers argued, accusing one another of negligence. Commanders barked orders, struggling to keep their authority as fear gnawed at the edges of their own minds. Some of the alien mercenaries started to wonder if they were facing something more than just a single human. Could one man truly be responsible for such chaos? They had heard tales of Earth's elite warriors, stories of human resilience that bordered on myth. Yet they had dismissed these stories as propaganda, stories meant to instill fear in lesser minds. Now, however, those tales didn't seem quite so exaggerated. The Green Beret continued his work, never striking too hard, always leaving them guessing. His patience was unyielding. He had no need to rush. He knew that the aliens' confidence, their belief in their superiority, was slowly unraveling. By the time he was ready to confront them openly, they would already be defeated in spirit. As dawn approached, he retreated into the jungle, leaving the alien camp in disarray. He knew the effect his actions had already taken. The fear was tangible, spreading through their ranks like wildfire. And he knew that this was only the beginning. For him, the battle wasn't just about survival or victory. It was about showing them that Earth's defenders were not to be trifled with, that even a single human could stand against an army if he had the skill and the will. And as the sun rose, casting an eerie light over the fractured alien camp, the Green Beret watched from his hiding place, calm and ready for the next move. He had the advantage, and he would not let it go. He would teach these alien mercenaries the lesson of their lives. They would remember Earth. They would remember the Green Beret. The night air was tense as the alien patrol crept through the jungle. Shadows clung to the trees, dense and foreboding, while the rustle of leaves whispered unsettling truths. The Green Beret was out there, lurking, hidden in the darkness, watching their every step. They had seen him strike, but never him. They had lost guards, rations, fuel cells, and now they were told to catch the unseen menace. Their frustration simmered just below the surface, yet each warrior knew better than to voice it. They moved in silence, listening for anything out of the ordinary. But there was nothing, only the occasional call of a nocturnal creature, the rustling of branches in the wind. The Green Beret had taken everything from them in subtle, almost surgical strikes. Food, supplies, their confidence, all with precision and purpose. Now, the once cocky alien soldiers were left doubting every shadow, fearing every sound. Their technology, so advanced it once seemed unstoppable, had done nothing to help them. It was as if he knew every weakness in their equipment. Suddenly, a faint sound, like the snap of a twig, brought them to a halt. They froze, weapons at the ready, eyes wide and scanning. But again nothing. Only silence and the heavy thumping of their own hearts. Yet, unseen by any of them, the Green Beret lay prone nearby, camouflaged perfectly with the jungle floor. He had picked that spot intentionally, knowing their path, planning his ambush. He watched them closely, counting breaths, steadying his own. With a small, controlled motion, he activated a diversion, a makeshift noisemaker he'd fashioned from scavenged alien tech. The sound was faint but enough to draw the mercenaries' attention in the opposite direction. As expected, they followed it, creeping toward the noise with tension in every movement. This was when he struck. Quick as a shadow, he darted from his spot, striking the alien at the back of the patrol. A swift twist, and the alien went limp, his weapon silently lowered to the ground as his comrades moved on, unaware. In seconds, the Green Beret faded back into the darkness, just a ghost in the night. He knew exactly how to destabilize them, step by silent step. The aliens reached the source of the noisemaker, their frustration mounting as they found nothing, just an innocuous piece of tech. But when they turned back, they noticed the absence of their comrade. Panic flared. A quick head count confirmed what they dreaded. Another one was missing. Tension crackled in the air as fear set in. Their leader signaled for silence, gesturing toward the dark forest. The alien warriors strained their senses, hoping to spot the Green Beret. He watched them from a distance, knowing the psychological effect he'd had. With each guard he took out, he left behind not just a missing comrade but a gap in their morale. They were seasoned warriors, but none of them had faced an opponent who fought like this, who seemed to understand their every move, who was relentless and invisible. Minutes ticked by, each one eroding their resolve. When the Green Beret struck again, it was even faster. Another warrior down, another barely contained wave of panic as they once again failed to locate him. Their weapons were advanced, their training top-tier, but they couldn't fight what they couldn't see. The jungle seemed to close in around them, each tree a potential hiding place, each shadow a possible threat. The alien leader, now visibly agitated, barked orders. He called in reinforcements, pulling together a larger patrol with tracking devices. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning for heat signatures, movement, anything. But the Green Beret knew these tricks. He moved with painstaking precision, keeping his body temperature low by using mud and foliage, staying invisible to their sensors. One of the alien drones hovered near a section of trees, catching a glimpse of something that could be him. Immediately, the patrol shifted, approaching cautiously. They advanced, weapons at the ready, convinced they had him. But as they approached the spot, a series of flashbangs went off, disorienting them, blinding their sensitive eyes, and throwing their formation into chaos. He moved in again, this time with speed, picking off 2 more aliens in the aftermath, leaving their bodies concealed in the underbrush. When the mercenaries regained their vision, 2 more were missing. Fear had turned to dread now. They had never seen anything like this, a lone human soldier tearing through their ranks, using the jungle itself as his weapon. They were advanced, but they were outmatched by the adaptability and sheer tactical genius of a Green Beret. The commander called an emergency retreat. This was no ordinary human, he realized. This was an Earth warrior trained in tactics so ancient and primal that their technology was useless against it. They returned to camp with a fraction of their original force, weary and beaten, only to be met with the disappointed glares of those who had stayed behind. Their silence was telling. No words were exchanged. The message was clear: failure. The Green Beret watched their retreat, a faint smirk on his face. He hadn't even broken a sweat. To him, this was all routine, the result of years of training and experience. These aliens, with their gadgets and arrogance, were predictable. They relied on machines, on sensors, on everything but the human skill and grit he possessed. And it was that grit they couldn't counter. The aliens regrouped, working through the night to reinforce their camp. More guards were posted, more drones were deployed. Every warrior was on edge, with orders to shoot at anything that moved. Yet the Green Beret knew the effect was temporary. Exhaustion would set in soon, and when it did, he would be there to exploit it. As the night wore on, he continued his game, picking off guards at random intervals, never staying in one place long enough for them to pinpoint his location. He was methodical, calm, treating each movement as a part of his mission, with purpose and precision. The camp was a hive of fear now, the soldiers snapping at each other, paranoid, sleep-deprived, and mentally frayed. They knew the Green Beret was out there, watching, waiting, and that knowledge gnawed at them more than any weapon ever could. When dawn broke, the alien commander was forced to acknowledge the toll this one human had taken on his men. Their morale was in tatters, discipline was waning, and even the strongest among them couldn't hide their fear. They had come here as conquerors, expecting an easy victory, but they were facing a force they hadn't prepared for, a soldier who knew their weaknesses, who thrived in adversity, who was using their fear against them. The Green Beret observed from a distance as the camp settled into uneasy silence. His job was far from done, but he knew he had them exactly where he wanted them. He had proven to these alien warriors that their strength meant nothing here, not against him, not against a soldier of Earth. and as he faded back into the shadows, he felt a quiet satisfaction. This was only the beginning. The Green Beret watched the alien camp from a hidden vantage point, taking in the scene with careful, practiced eyes. Their numbers had thinned, but the aliens had fortified their defenses, setting up barriers and traps, positioning guards at every corner. Every so often, drones buzzed above the treetops, scanning for anything out of place. They were tense, vigilant, but the Green Berets saw it for what it was, fear wrapped in steel. The jungle around the camp was dense and alive. The soldier knew its rhythms, the way the leaves moved in the wind, how the creatures rustled under the cover of darkness. The aliens, however, were outsiders here, foreigners to this land. They were trying to mold it to their will, forcing it to yield to their presence, unaware that the jungle itself could be a weapon. Slowly, methodically, he began setting traps. He twisted vines into tripwires, laid snares, and placed sharpened sticks hidden beneath layers of leaves. Each setup was small, almost invisible, yet deadly. His movements were soundless, his body blending with the shadows and foliage, a ghost working in silence. He knew each trap wasn't just about taking out one alien. It was a message, a reminder that they were not in control here. The first alien patrol that entered the jungle was cautious, moving slowly and carefully. They scanned the ground, keeping an eye out for anything unusual. Yet, within minutes, one of them stumbled over a camouflaged tripwire, triggering a silent trap that sent him sprawling into a pit of sharpened sticks. The others froze in horror, their leader barking frantic orders as they scrambled to pull him out. By the time they succeeded, another trap had sprung, catching a soldier off guard with a silent snare that yanked him upward, leaving him dangling from a tree, struggling to break free. Panic set in. The aliens shouted to one another, their voices echoing through the dense foliage. They were trapped in a jungle they didn't understand, by an enemy they couldn't see, and every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves seemed to carry the threat of death. The Green Beret watched from a distance, his expression hard and focused. He knew the alien forces relied on their technology, on their advanced weaponry and armor, yet here, that advantage was slipping away. The jungle was his ally, each tree, each leaf, a part of his strategy. He moved through it with ease, leaving no trace, while the aliens stumbled through it like children lost in a maze. When the alien patrol finally regrouped, their leader was furious. They tried to burn a path through the foliage, using their weapons to incinerate sections of the jungle in a desperate attempt to clear the area. But this only added to their vulnerability. Smoke filled the air, limiting their visibility, and the Green Beret used the cover to slip closer, observing their movements, memorizing their patterns. In the early hours of the morning, the aliens returned to camp, battered and weary, their morale in tatters. As they entered, they didn't realize they were being watched, that the Green Beret had tracked them, mapping every entrance, every blind spot. He had planned for this moment, knowing the effect of his traps would be amplified once they felt safe. Waiting until the aliens finally relaxed, he set his next plan into motion. Without warning, a series of small explosions erupted on the edge of the camp. They weren't powerful enough to cause massive damage, but were strategically placed to create chaos, setting off alarms, and triggering confusion. The aliens scrambled, shouting orders, fumbling with their weapons, unsure where to aim. The Green Beret was nowhere near the blasts. He had detonated them remotely from a safe distance, his hands steady, his gaze unwavering. As they fumbled to restore order, the Green Beret struck again. Using the camp's own layout against them, he slipped in and out, dismantling their defenses, targeting their weakest points. He avoided direct confrontations, opting instead for silent takedowns, removing one guard at a time, leaving the others to wonder where their comrades had gone. Every time they thought they had him cornered, he disappeared, leaving only silence in his wake. The alien commander grew desperate, barking commands into his communication device, rallying his remaining forces. He ordered more patrols, tighter security, everything he could think of to trap this invisible enemy. Yet, each new precaution only played into the Green Beret's hands. The more guards they posted, the more opportunities he had to pick them off. Every extra layer of security became a liability, a point of weakness he could exploit. Hours passed, and the aliens were left exhausted, their nerves frayed, their confidence shattered. They had come to this planet as conquerors, armed with the best technology and training their species could provide. Yet, in the face of one human, they were reduced to frightened, disorganized shadows of themselves. The Green Beret had turned their arrogance against them, had shown them the limits of their technology, the weakness in their reliance on brute force. By dawn, the camp was in disarray. Alien soldiers huddled in groups, casting nervous glances at the jungle, their weapons held tight, their faces etched with fear. The Green Beret had accomplished his mission not through overwhelming firepower or advanced equipment but through sheer skill, patience, and an intimate knowledge of the jungle. He was a shadow, a force they couldn't understand or predict. From his vantage point, the Green Beret watched the camp, his mind already turning to his next move. He knew they would be watching, expecting another attack, but he also knew that fear had already done half the work for him. The aliens were exhausted, demoralized, their unity broken by doubt and paranoia. In their eyes, he was an unstoppable force, a predator who knew no fear. He slipped back into the jungle, vanishing into the foliage as silently as he had arrived. The aliens would spend the day fortifying their camp, repairing their defenses, trying to regroup. They would think they had a chance, that they could stand against him if only they kept watch, if only they stayed vigilant. But the Green Beret knew the truth. They were already defeated. Each attack, each trap, each moment of terror had chipped away at their strength, had left them hollow and vulnerable. The jungle had become his weapon, their technology his advantage, and the more they fought to resist, the more they fell into his trap. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, the Green Beret moved on, his mission far from over. The aliens would remember this night, this battle against an enemy who had shown them that Earth's defenders were not to be underestimated. They had come to conquer, but they were leaving in fear, haunted by a single soldier who had made them question everything they thought they knew. And in the depths of the jungle, as he prepared for his next strike, the Green Beret knew he was only just beginning. The alien commander paced through the camp, his frustration barely concealed. The relentless assaults, the traps, the silent takedowns, all had unraveled his once disciplined force into a fractured, exhausted band of soldiers. The Green Beret had them pinned, yet they couldn't see him, couldn't track him, couldn't even predict his next move. Their once formidable confidence had dissolved into gnawing fear. But this time, the commander had a plan. He'd called in their best technology, deploying drones with high-sensitivity thermal imaging and bioscanners across the camp's perimeter. Tonight, they would flush out the human ghost. As the evening fell, drones buzzed overhead, casting grids of infrared across the jungle, sweeping every inch for signs of heat or movement. The alien soldiers adjusted their gear, synced to the scanners, and huddled close to the camp's center, hoping that their proximity to each other would deter the unseen predator. The tension was palpable, the atmosphere thick with anticipation, but each warrior held their weapon tightly, convinced that this time they would finally corner him. The Green Beret watched from afar, his sharp eyes taking in the drone's movements, noting their patterns. He could feel their heightened alertness, the way their guards stayed close to each other, each one unwilling to be the next to vanish. Yet they didn't know him, didn't understand how he adapted to every new threat, how he made every challenge another piece in his plan. He'd seen their scanners, their heat-tracking tech, and he knew just how to counter it. Methodically, he coated his skin with a layer of mud and leaves, reducing his heat signature to nearly nothing, blending into the jungle's natural warmth. He then shifted low to the ground, moving beneath the radar of the alien sensors, taking painstaking care with each step. This was familiar territory for him, a return to the basics, the most primal form of evasion. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a part of the jungle, invisible, untraceable. He crept forward, edging closer to the camp's perimeter, carefully positioning himself near one of the bioscanner drones. He observed it closely, watching as it scanned its programmed arc. With precision timing, he pulled out a small reflective shard, tilting it to catch a beam from the drone, reflecting the light in a way that scrambled the scanner. To the alien monitors, his presence was nothing more than a brief flicker, an error in the system. One of the alien guards nearby saw the glitch and called it out, alerting his commander. The Green Beret remained absolutely still, waiting as the drone adjusted, searching for a sign of his presence. But he was gone before it could reset, melting into the cover of the trees. The aliens were on high alert now, their confidence cracking again. Each flicker of movement on their screens, each tiny blip of interference, sent waves of anxiety through the camp. The Green Beret moved with purpose, exploiting every gap in their defenses. He circled around the camp, using the shadows cast by the drone's lights to mask his approach. He knew they were watching, that they thought they were ready, but he also knew that their high-tech scanners made them reliant on signals, on sensors. They were blind to the simplest forms of stealth, to the ways of a soldier trained to work without a signal, without backup. He moved like a shadow, a part of the terrain itself. Then he struck. Silent and deadly, he dismantled their drones one by one, disabling each one as he slipped past. A well-placed EMP device took down 3 drones in quick succession, plunging a section of the camp into darkness. Panic gripped the guards as they realized they'd lost their visual cover. They scrambled, repositioning, attempting to realign their defenses. But he was already inside their perimeter, watching them flounder, their vulnerability painfully clear. The alien commander, desperate to regain control, barked commands, rallying his troops to spread out and maintain a tight watch. He activated the remaining bioscanners, ordering them to conduct sweeps of the immediate area. But the Green Beret had anticipated this. He slipped between the soldiers, staying just out of reach, his footsteps perfectly timed to avoid detection. One by one, he took them down, leaving only faint signs of his presence, small clues designed to further shake their confidence, deepen their fear. The aliens, now visibly shaken, grew increasingly desperate. Their commander deployed his elite warriors, fully armored and equipped with advanced thermal cloaks, to corner the Green Beret. These were his last and best soldiers, each one chosen for their combat skills, trained to handle the most dangerous enemies. They moved with precision, scanning the area, confident in their advanced gear. But they, too, underestimated their foe. The Green Beret let them get close, watching their movements, noting their weapons and strategies. Then, with calculated precision, he made his move. He isolated one of the elite guards, luring him away from the group with the sound of a faint, deliberate rustle in the brush. The guard pursued, his weapon raised, every step measured. But as he reached the source of the sound, he found nothing, only empty foliage. He hesitated, lowering his weapon just slightly, and that's when the Green Beret struck. A swift, silent takedown left the guard unconscious, his advanced equipment now in the Green Beret's hands. The soldier quickly disassembled it, using parts to create more traps, planting them throughout the jungle as he continued his assault. With each guard he took down, he left behind fragments of their own tech, each piece a reminder of their own helplessness, their inability to counter a true warrior of Earth. By the time the aliens regrouped, they were down to a handful of soldiers, each one trembling, their faces taut with fear. Their commander, once proud and unbreakable, was visibly shaken, his confidence shattered by the relentless assault. He called for a retreat, his voice trembling as he ordered his remaining forces to fall back, to escape the wrath of this invisible enemy. The Green Beret watched from the shadows as the aliens abandoned their camp, fleeing into the jungle, their morale broken, their once mighty force reduced to a scattering of terrified survivors. He knew his work was done here, that he had shown them the true strength of Earth, the resilience and skill of its defenders. As the last of the alien soldiers disappeared into the night, the Green Beret stood alone, victorious, his mission accomplished. He'd come to this jungle as one man against a legion, armed with nothing but his training, his wits, and an iron will. And he'd left them with nothing but fear, a reminder that Earth's warriors were a force to be reckoned with. Without a sound, he turned and melted back into the jungle, a shadow fading into the night, leaving behind only the quiet, unyielding silence of a land that had claimed victory over those who thought themselves invincible. The last of the alien forces huddled together in the heart of the jungle, their once formidable numbers reduced to a scattering of tired, broken warriors. They no longer looked like an elite force. They looked beaten, each face etched with exhaustion, each movement tentative, wary of the darkness around them. Every shadow felt like a threat, every rustling leaf a reminder of the ghost who hunted them. The Green Beret was everywhere and nowhere, and they knew now that he didn't just fight with bullets or blades, he fought with fear. The alien commander glanced at his remaining soldiers, his own courage waning under the weight of their silent stares. His orders no longer brought comfort or confidence. They were mere echoes, meaningless in the face of their enemies' relentless pursuit. They were down to their last line of defense. The Green Beret had stripped them of everything else. The commander gripped his weapon, forcing himself to hold on to the last shreds of his authority. In the shadows, the Green Beret watched them, his gaze calm, calculated. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Every trap, every strike, every tactic had led them here, to this final stand. The aliens had been invincible when he first arrived, confident in their superior technology and numbers. Now they were cornered, stripped of every advantage, reduced to fear. But he wouldn't allow them to leave unscathed. He intended for them to carry a message back, one that would echo far beyond this jungle. Silently he circled them, his movements masked by the natural sounds of the night. He allowed himself to be seen briefly, a flicker in the distance, just enough to catch their attention and draw them into position. A few alien soldiers raised their weapons, their nerves fraying further. But before they could lock onto him, he was gone again, vanishing into the thick jungle, leaving them to wonder if they'd seen anything at all. One of the soldiers, younger and already trembling, stepped forward, his voice shaking as he whispered, "Did you see him?" Another replied with an equally unsteady voice, his grip on his weapon tightening. The commander snapped at them to focus, his own voice betraying his fear. But even he couldn't shake the feeling that they were all being watched. The Green Beret struck without warning, a precise, brutal assault that came from nowhere. One alien went down, then another. His movements were fluid, efficient, each strike landing with the lethal accuracy of a trained warrior. The aliens fired wildly into the darkness, their weapons lighting up the jungle in flashes of blue and white. But he was never where they thought he'd be. Every time they turned, he was gone, leaving behind only silence and a sense of dread that grew with every passing second. The commander's desperation reached its peak. He ordered his troops to regroup, but the Green Beret was already one step ahead. He'd anticipated their every move, hurting them, pressing them deeper into the jungle, using their own panic to guide them where he wanted. He left no gaps, no escape. This wasn't just a battle, it was a lesson, one they would carry with them for the rest of their lives, if they survived. At last, the Green Beret appeared before them, his form a dark silhouette against the dim light of the alien weaponry. He stood silent, unmoving, his presence both a challenge and a warning. The aliens froze, the terror of finally facing him seizing them. This was the man who had torn through their ranks, who had bested their technology, who had turned their invasion into a nightmare. And now, he was here, standing before them with the unshakable confidence of a soldier who knew he'd already won. The commander raised his weapon, his hands shaking as he aimed at the figure before him. But the Green Beret didn't flinch. He stared back, his gaze unwavering, a quiet fury in his eyes that spoke of every friend, every comrade he'd fought for, every inch of earth he'd defended. The alien commander hesitated, his confidence unraveling completely under that gaze. He understood, in that moment, the strength of humanity, a resilience that didn't rely on technology or numbers but on something deeper, something unstoppable. The Green Beret held his ground, his silence a declaration that words could never match. Then, with a single, measured movement, he pointed toward the path that led out of the jungle. His message was clear. He would spare them, but only if they left. Only if they took the message of their failure back to their commanders, back to the stars. They would return to their kind with the truth, that Earth was not weak, that its defenders were not to be taken lightly. This was their warning, their final chance to retreat. The alien commander lowered his weapon, his defeat complete. He gave the signal to his remaining soldiers, each one lowering their own weapons, fear and relief mingling in their expressions. They began their retreat, moving slowly, every step haunted by the knowledge that they had been bested, that they had been given mercy only because their enemy had chosen to grant it. The Green Beret watched them go, his figure still and unmoving, the jungle his shield, his weapon. He stayed there until the last of them had disappeared, their footsteps fading into the distance. Only then did he turn, his mission complete, his message delivered. He melted back into the shadows, vanishing as he had come, leaving behind only the silence of the jungle and the memory of a single warrior who had defended his world. As the aliens stumbled out of the jungle, broken and humbled, the whispers began among them, tales of the Green Beret spreading like wildfire. They would tell others, warning them of the warrior who fought with the jungle at his side, who knew no fear, who turned every disadvantage into victory. And in the dark corners of the universe, the story would grow, a story of Earth's defenders, of the resilience, the skill, the unbreakable will of a lone human who stood against an army and won. For the Green Beret, it was another mission, one of many. But for those who had faced him, it was a lesson, a mark etched deep in their memories, a warning they would never forget. Earth was not just a world. It was a place defended by warriors who turned fear into strength, who saw every threat as a challenge to overcome. And as the sun rose over the jungle, casting light on the silent battleground, it was clear to all who had faced him, the Green Beret had won. He had shown them the strength of humanity, a strength that no force in the galaxy could ever conquer.